Welcome back. This is Bold Like a Leopard, and I wanted to do a video today about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, even though there are many others that could easily have been a topic. There's been much to talk about in the news, much of it tragic, by the way. But because of my schedule and the schedule of my family, not easy to make too many videos a week. So today, we're going to talk about a little conversation I had last week. We had a friend of my wife's over, a nice lady, and the topic, of course, was whether firearms should be regulated more. Now, I don't want this to become some sort of video where you use it in order to just shove it down the throats of people that disagree with you, your point of view, right? And I think that that's the worst way to convince people that they have the wrong perspective or that they maybe should look at a different perspective, right? Because always we get our opinions from our own experience or from perhaps information that we've been fed, often without a balanced viewpoint being provided in order to give you a real choice. So we had a great conversation. It was pretty amusing because the woman said, well, I'm not going to accuse you of being pro-gun. And it was hard not to laugh at the moment because, as you might know if you watch this channel, I do support 100% the Second Amendment. I believe that there should be less control of firearms in the United States. And by the way, if you live in a different country, and you believe that your citizens should have the right to own a personal weapon, I support you too. But I am more focused on the United States. I don't think that I can dictate to people in other countries like Mexico or what have you, Spain, what their policy should be. But we do have the Second Amendment here in the U.S. It is part of the Bill of Rights. And while we're talking about that, many Americans don't realize that one of the real reasons that the Bill of that any sort of amendment to the Second Amendment or the infringement of it would be, I feel, the beginning of the erosion of the other Bill of Rights. Many people don't even know what each different amendment of the Bill of Rights entails. So we're going to go through some of the ones that are lesser known to begin here today. And we're going to discuss exactly why I think the Second Amendment is so essential for the preservation of other amendments. Now, the ones that most people talk about are the First, Second, and Fourth, and Fifth Amendments, right? Sometimes the 10th Amendment. And those entail the right to free speech, that's the First Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, Second Amendment, the protection from illegal searches and seizures, that's the Fourth Amendment, and the right to not self-incriminate oneself in front of court, that's the Fifth Amendment, and the 10th Amendment reserves certain rights that are not enumerated for the federal government to the states or the people. And those are the 5 amendments that most Americans think about. There are other amendments, though, that one could perhaps look at as anachronistic. And one of the reasons that I'm talking about anachronism is because it is the main crowbar that's being used to attack the Second Amendment, meaning that most people say that when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, they didn't envision that there would be automatic weapons, or didn't envision that there could be things that are way ahead of their concept of firearms, which included muskets, it included cannon, it included warships that had cannon on them. So we're talking a little bit about a different world, and that's their premise, that the government, if the government were existing, the government that they had existing in a time like ours, they would have never given the latitude within the Second Amendment where people could own perhaps automatic weapons, which had to be outlawed during the National Firearms Act, I think of 1935. So the reason that I want to bring up the other amendments is that we have the First Amendment, which is freedom of speech, the press, assembly, and petition. Why would I say that could be an anachronism? Well, to be clear, in the 18th century, which is when this was written, many of the modern cult religions didn't exist. There was no Mormonism. Islam was very rare in the United States. Some of the sects of Judaism that we have today didn't exist, like conservative and reform, I believe, both sprang from the 19th century. It could be, and look, we have to take your logical conclusion to its most extreme, which is that maybe if Hamilton and Washington and Franklin and Madison would have looked at the type of religions that came later, especially some of the more, let's say, eccentric ones, they would have said, hey, maybe we shouldn't have these people, around. Maybe we should ban these sorts of religions. And this comes up very frequently when people talk about Islam and the jihad and things like that. And it's a very clear gray area where many of these people were unaware when the amendment was written about some of the finer teachings of Islam. Apart from perhaps Thomas Jefferson, who read about it, he didn't really experience it. He had to deal with the Barbary pirates when he was president. So the idea that the First Amendment is so sacrosanct that it is something that cannot be altered, by saying this thing where the Second Amendment is outdated, it's an anachronism, that the Founding Fathers could never envision the type of firearms that we have today in their time, it opens the door to many, many more issues that are, you could easily see some of the other amendments rendered obsolete, rendered basically moot. By saying that the modern world does not hold by these amendments, there are many different ways that you could go. The Third Amendment prohibits against the quartering of troops by citizens. And the reason that this was a big issue was that before the Revolution, the British Army and the Crown, they did not look at the average citizen or average subject of the British Crown as a person who has property rights that preclude them from being invaded by the military. So it said, so this is the Third Amendment: no soldier shall in time of peace be quartered in any house without the consent of the owner, nor in time of war, but in a manner to be prescribed by law. And there is very little talk about this, but nowadays we could see, because of automation and because of various other innovations in artificial intelligence, we could see that this could be rendered an obsolete amendment, right? We see all the time that the military is developing AI soldiers. So this is from Popular Mechanics. This is an AI soldier. Now, I'm not trying to scaremonger here, right? I don't think that this will happen overnight. I think that this might be cost prohibitive for the time being. But yeah, there definitely is a possibility that in the future, the U.S. government and other governments could employ robotic military personnel, and what's to say that you couldn't tell homeowners that, you're going to have this thing in your house. What's this, the Third Amendment? No, I mean, the Founding Fathers didn't know about robotic soldiers. What does this have to do? That is why we have to look at the Bill of Rights as a very holistic issue, not something to be trifled with when you want to solve an issue. People want to solve the issue of firearms and GUN violence, as they would say. I can't say the word because of YouTube's algorithm. So please watch on Odyssey, Rumble, and BitChute. If you haven't already subscribed, by the way, the addresses are below: BitChute, Rumble, and Odyssey. They should be in the description. And if you go to any of those websites, you can subscribe. What about the Fourth Amendment? Well, illegal search and seizure back in the 1800s was done primarily in person, was done primarily by soldiers or police or agents of the crown who would enter your house and try to seize documents or arms or what have you, private property, and take it back. Well, nowadays, this is the biggest change, the information revolution of the past 30 years and even before that, to be honest with you. What's to say that the government cannot, by going into some of the more modern ways of intercepting information, what's to say that they can't go and look at your fax machine records, look at all, hack into your email, hack into your personal computer. Now, these things are already happening, right? There was the famous case of after the San Bernardino shooting that the Apple Corporation would not reveal. It would not reveal in 2015 how to get into the iPhone of the two suspects they're not suspects. The two perpetrators of the San Bernardino shooting. They were two members of ISIS. So the FBI had to use a back door, right? Well, nowadays, big tech corporations are trying to say, well, you know what? We're just going to go ahead and give people that, meaning that once you have things in your iPhone or in your personal device that could be incriminating, unfortunately. And even if they're not incriminating, they could be embarrassing, potentially. Right? For example, if you have an affair, if you are, trying to, if you have some sort of argument with one of your relatives and there's embarrassing information about you that could be used by them, all sorts of, or if you're being extorted, or if there is, whatever you want to say. Right? If somebody is a closeted homosexual and the government can access that information, what's to say they can't? I mean, the Fourth Amendment in 1791 had nothing to do with your email. It had nothing. So why can't the government come and do that? The real question has to be asked of the people who want to change the Second Amendment because they think it's an anachronism. You have to ask these people. And many of them don't recognize the connection because they see the Second Amendment as sort of this standalone issue that is one of the unique problems where the Bill of Rights is antiquated in only that respect. No, there have been so many issues that have come up that challenge the real validity of the entire Bill of Rights, right? Because the government is simply it has to deal with new advances in technology, right? And new advances of technology not only have to do with firearms, it has to do with the press, it has to do with financial transactions, it has to do with new manufacturing methods. All of those are challenges in both the legal and the real sphere. So that's what I want to talk about today. Really, with each amendment, how is it that you can say that they are going to be upheld? If you say that the Second Amendment must be changed, you can say the same thing of many of these other ones. How about the Fifth Amendment, the grand jury, double jeopardy, self-incrimination, and due process? Now let's take a look at that in much more detail. Okay, so where is the actual? So Fifth Amendment text. So the Fifth Amendment is actually a very important one. The Fifth Amendment creates it. So no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia when in actual service in time of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Yeah, this is it's a very core requirement of our justice system. Sorry, I keep looking back because my dog is running around there. The real problem that you have to look at is that people are put on trial multiple times for the same crime. There even was when with Derek Chauvin on trial. They planned to bring civil rights charges against Derek Chauvin if he would have been acquitted of the murder of George Floyd. Now, I understand why people think, oh, that's fine, because it would be a different charge, violating the civil rights of George Floyd. But you realize that this is a way that the federal government has found, and it might be legally kosher and everything, but they are circumventing the Fifth Amendment. And it's, in my opinion, it's wrong. That's why I disagree with civil rights charges. I disagree with hate crimes charges. I do believe fully that we should try people based on crimes that are easy to prove, as opposed to crimes that are exclusively dependent on motive and on the state of mind of the person who is the defendant. Right? It's already hard enough because we need to test which degree of homicide is being used against the defendant because of the intent. Why add more and more things that can gum it up? So that is the Fifth Amendment, and there are many, many more things. And the Fifth Amendment is something people don't talk about nearly enough. It's kind of seen as a joke because in many legal dramas, defendants take the Fifth. But it's pretty important, right? If you're a person who is, you're under trial for some sort of serious crime, and you didn't do it, but you don't want to be trapped by a prosecutor who could go and make you into some sort of punching bag on the stand. Yeah, you should be able to say, yes, I will not testify either in my defense or against myself. It's just wrong. Furthermore, so we'll go to the next amendment, right? We've got the Sixth Amendment, not really talked about. So I mentioned again, the amendments that most people know about are the First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, and 10th. The Sixth Amendment is the right to face your accusers, right? So, let's see here. So the Sixth Amendment is something that is not really talked about that much, but we have in modern times many people who become defendants or become at least suspects, and what is often used is secret evidence against them, the evidence gathered by intelligence agencies. And that's one of the reasons that the Patriot Act under President Bush was one of the worst infringements on civil liberties. It's something that if you're a die-in-the-wool Republican, you should seriously consider whether you should trust the party, because the Republican Party is responsible for that. It's something that they have to really bear as one of their cardinal sins of their history. It says this is the Sixth Amendment, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right of a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. All of these are being tested. It says even here, this was tested in a series of cases involving terrorism. But we're also seeing much more of this coming into play now, because you have Rudy Giuliani being arrested over the last weekend. Why was Rudy Giuliani arrested? He was the counsel for President Trump. Arresting Rudy Giuliani for work that he did, legal work he did as an attorney, is a violation of the Sixth Amendment, and it's a violation against Donald Trump, whether you want to call it that or not. You cannot go, unless an attorney is actually breaking the law in pursuit of his work, meaning, for example, he smuggles in contraband to a prison to his client, things like that. you cannot go to that, or he's assisting in a criminal conspiracy, right? And there's no evidence that that actually happened against Rudy Giuliani yet. If they cannot obtain proof of that, yes, this would be a Sixth Amendment violation. And people don't talk about it because the Sixth Amendment is hardly even covered in schools. Seventh Amendment is the jury trial. The Eighth Amendment is the protection against cruel or an unusual punishment. Now, these are things that people talk about very often as well. The Eighth Amendment. What about solitary confinement? What about waterboarding? Right? Many of the people who are now serving in the Biden administration, as well as in the Trump and Obama administration, all supported the use of waterboarding. The waterboarding issue, people don't talk about it anymore because they're completely partisan. It has nothing to do with their actual belief system. It doesn't matter whether you're for waterboarding or against waterboarding. You are fine with it because the administration in office right now is on your team. It's the Republicans. Under Trump, there were many people who said, yes, waterboarding's fine, absolutely fine. Under Obama, many of these Democrats said, yes, waterboarding is okay. Under Biden, many of these Democrats are against saying waterboarding is okay. Under Bush, they said, no, waterboarding is a human rights violation. So the Eighth Amendment says excessive bail should not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Now, the bail issue, you could come back and say, because the Second Amendment, if you're saying that it is an anachronism, why can't you say the Eighth Amendment is an anachronism? If it's an anachronism that for public safety, people should not be able to own firearms that could be used, supposedly according to gun control advocates. Now I've said the word, but if those people are saying, oh, these are weapons of war, they should not be owned by civilians. Well, many of these defendants, they shouldn't be out on the streets. Why should they not be given excessive bail? I mean, they're dangerous people. We now have the digital means to prove that many of these people are guilty. We don't have to rely on the standards of the 18th century. We can now even videotape these people in the commission of the crime. We can now have these people, we can have confessions recorded and all of that. Why is it necessary? So this video over here is the first one, and I'm just using this as an introduction. I know that many of you who support these new gun control laws, you feel that you're going to protect more people. But the reality is that you are, first of all, I think it's going to fail, period. But if it were to pass, you would be creating more criminals. People who were law-abiding citizens would suddenly become, fugitives or people who are absconding from the law. And that is not the way to create a more harmonious society. But just as important, even though people don't know it, even though people don't feel it in their everyday lives, you would be taking most of the other amendments in the Constitution and basically throwing them in the Bill of Rights. You would be taking most of these amendments and casting a shadow on them, saying, well, the Second Amendment is now obsolete. Let's look at some of these other amendments. Let's look about how these limit the capacity of the government to guarantee your safety. That's one of the reasons that we have a Bill of Rights. We never intended the government to be the sole provider of safety and security for American citizens. That's why we have a Second Amendment. But it's also why we have a First Amendment. It's also why we have a Fifth Amendment. It's also why we have a Fourth Amendment, because much of the abuse, much of the threat that the Founding Fathers saw in their everyday lives didn't come from average criminals, and it didn't come from outside invaders. It came from their own authorities. So please like, share, and subscribe. Again, I urge you to subscribe on BitChute, Rumble, and Odyssey instead of on YouTube. And hopefully this dog will settle down. You can also find me on Minds. You can support me financially if you want on Subscribestar. And I'll talk to you later. You can also find my newsletter, will probably be in the description below, through Substack. And I'll talk to you later.